what would happen to your muscles if you stopped doing anything. So for this particular study, they recruited 7 men and they were an average age of 23. So these are young guys. They had a normal BMI, normal weight. So once participants agreed to take part in this study, they were each led to their own private hospital room that was air conditioned, presumably had some form of entertainment, a TV, and obviously a hospital bed. Now for the period of the 2 weeks of this study, participants were essentially under 24-hour surveillance by the study team, and they were instructed to stay in that bed for the whole 14 days. Now the study said that they performed all of their daily activities in that bed, and I would presume that also means taking care of business. Even the amount of food that they were given was very tightly controlled. They were given 3 meals a day, each personalized to their own macronutrient and calorie intake to make sure that they kind of maintain their body weight. But before the study started, the study team took certain measurements from these participants. So they were looking at various things such as their muscle volume, just how much muscle they had in their quadriceps. They did that through an MRI scanner, which is a really accurate, highly sensitive tool to use. They even took chunks of their quadricep muscle, very small chunks, through a biopsy so that they could look at the individual muscle fibers. So after 14 days, they did another MRI scan. They looked at their quadricep muscle, and what they found was there was an average of a 5.7% decrease in their quadricep muscle size from before to after the bed rest. Then they took another chunk of their quadricep muscle and they looked at the samples from before and after. What they did was quite technical and quite interesting. They artificially contracted these single muscle fibers using calcium ions, and they essentially measured the maximum force that these individual muscle fibers could exert. They found that there was a 32% lower force output at the end versus the start. Another measure I forgot to mention was they did a maximum exercise test before and after. Now, what they were looking at here was the ability of the body to consume and utilize oxygen at high intensity exercise. Now, this is often seen as the gold standard measure of cardiorespiratory fitness and correlates really well with longevity, things like that. Now, from day 0 to day 14, these people performed worse on that test by 7.6%, which is quite substantial, indicating that their bodies became significantly less efficient at transporting oxygen to the working muscles and using that oxygen efficiently. So those changes are pretty stark, but here comes the interesting bit. So after the bed rest period was finished and 14 days was up, participants then did 2 weeks of exercise training or rehab to try and regain some of that physical performance that was lost. And there was some good news and bad news. The good news is after the 14 days of training, muscle mass pretty much returned to its baseline level. And the same also goes for their performance in that exercise test. So their VO2 peak, and the peak amount of oxygen that they were able to consume and utilize, this was pretty similar to what it was at day 0. However, under the microscope, there was a slightly different story. You see that force generation procedure that they did with the calcium ions, making their muscle fibers contract as much as possible, well, that was still much lower than when they started, and it wasn't very different to the last day of their bed rest, day 14, meaning the ability of the individual muscle fibers to contract to the maximum was significantly impaired compared to baseline, even 2 weeks after training and getting back into things. And what the authors say is that it's clear that there is a rapid decline in your muscle's ability to generate force when you expose it to prolonged immobilization, when you're not doing anything for a week or 2. Then when you become active again, that does start to improve, but it is a very gradual improvement and it takes time to get back to that previous level. Now, this is a bit of fun in terms of a hypothetical scenario. Hopefully no one watching this video has to undergo 2 weeks of complete immobilization, but there are, I think, a couple of things we can take from this. I think it's generally encouraging because you have a lot of people who think, oh, I'm not going to go to the gym for a couple of weeks, therefore I'm going to lose all my muscle. Well, you've got a study here where they took people and just had them do absolutely nothing for a couple of weeks, not even move their postural muscles, not really move any muscles at all, and they really only lost a very small amount of muscle mass, and it was completely regained after just 2 weeks of exercise training. However, it is important to mention these people weren't trained. Obviously, if you are at a very high level of training, it might take between maybe 4-8 weeks to get back to that kind of peak level that you were at before. Nevertheless, it's always interesting to peek into some of the more extreme examples in these studies. So thanks very much for watching, everyone, and I will see you soon in another video.